I rise to speak about the need to protect the Senate's constitutional authority.
Will the senator call up his amendment?
Mr. President, I call up my amendment number 1296 and ask that it be reported by number.
The clerk will report.
The senator from Texas, Mr. Cruz, for himself and Ms. Lummis, proposes amendment number 1296 to amendment number 1092.
Okay, under the previous order, there will be now 10 minutes of debate equally divided. The senator from Texas.
Mr. President, I rise to speak about the need to protect the Senate's constitutional authority to advise and consent on presidential nominations. With his appointment of multiple acting officials to perform senior roles that would otherwise require confirmation by this body, President Biden is deliberately circumventing the Senate and the nomination process. In some instances, these are vacancies of President Biden's own making. He has routinely nominated individuals with no relevant experience to key safety positions. And when threatened with the rejection of these unqualified nominees, President Biden simply withdraws their names from consideration and instead installs them in Senate-confirmed positions in an acting capacity. Julie Su's tenure as the head of the Department of Labor is a notable example. The recently reported elevation of Laura Daniel Davis to acting Deputy Secretary at the Department of the Interior is another. But I speak today about yet another case of this gamesmanship at a key safety agency where a rejected nominee has been given the reins. The National Highway Traffic Safety Administration, or NHTSA. Earlier this year, President Biden nominated Ann Carlson to be the administrator of NHTSA. She is an environmental law professor who has written for decades about how unelected bureaucrats should make major changes to American society in the name of combating global warming. But NHTSA is a safety agency whose mission is to make American roads safer. It is not the EPA. And Ms. Carlson has zero road safety experience. It was immediately obvious to many, including myself, that she was not qualified for this position. And in the face of opposition from every Republican on the Commerce Committee and dozens of stakeholders because of her lack of experience, the President withdrew Ms. Carlson's nomination just 2 months after he submitted it. President Biden could have followed his withdrawal of Ms. Carlson's nomination with the appointment of a qualified individual to lead NHTSA. He did just that with the FAA only last month, and that nominee was confirmed. But instead, President Biden turned around and appointed Ms. Carlson to the same position in an acting capacity in July. Promptly thereafter, she led the charge to effectively mandate expensive electric vehicles by proposing standards that stretch the agency's authority far beyond what the law allows. And as my committee has uncovered, Ms. Carlson has been involved in helping a for-profit law firm file dozens of nuisance suits across the country to try to bankrupt American energy companies. Then, when it was pointed out how she used her position and her law school students to help, she tried to cover it up. The stakes here are significant. Big government mandates for EVs threaten to make our nation less secure as we rely on supplies controlled by China. Less productive as auto workers fear for their jobs. Less competitive as automakers seek to stay afloat after unprofitable investments. Ford is losing a whopping $36,000 on every single EV sold. And less prosperous as families pay more for cars they don't actually want, or even worse, see their tax dollars spent on yet more bailouts. Congress must have a role in these kinds of far-reaching policies and the officials who implement them. The Appointments Clause of the Constitution is a critical check on executive power. The Senate must protect its prerogative to review the President's nominees to powerful unelected positions in the federal government. Some important protections already exist in law. The Vacancies Act sets rules for how a president may temporarily fill posts with acting officials. One of the restrictions it imposes is that a person may not serve as an acting official once the president submits his or her nomination to the Senate for the same position. This rule protects the Senate's constitutional role. It applies to Ms. Carlson's withdrawn nomination, and the limited exceptions to the rule do not allow her to serve as the acting head of NHTSA.
Senator's time has expired.
This bill would enforce our advice and consent authority.
Thank you.
Mr. President.
Senator from Hawaii.
Mr. President, this is a personal attack on a public servant and should be rejected. To be clear, Ann Carlson is legally authorized to serve as the acting administrator of NHTSA under the Federal Vacancies Reform Act. But what this amendment would do is set an alarming precedent in the Senate that if you have a political or policy disagreement with a particular administration policy, that you can take the public servant who is in charge of implementing it and take their salary hostage. And if the issue is that she hasn't been confirmed by the Senate, let's remember that in the last administration we had 2 different acting administrators working for months without being Senate confirmed, and it is no surprise that the ranking member of the Commerce Committee didn't object to them because he agreed with their policy. It is fine for you to disagree with fuel efficiency standards. It is fine for you to never want to move on from the internal combustion engine and to oppose the electric vehicle revolution. That's fine. What is not okay is the United States Senate coming in and defunding a position of an administrator with whom you disagree. And I want you all to think about this, Republicans. I want you all to think about this, Democrats. There will be times, as Claire McCaskill used to say, the door swings both ways in Washington. So let's think very carefully about whether we want to set a precedent where the United States Senate defunds public servants with whom we disagree. This amendment should be rejected.